If you saw my last video, 5 Do's and Don'ts for Crowdfunding and Comicsgate, I recommended that creators leave politics out of their work as much as they can, because it's way more likely to harm rather than help them connect with an audience. Plus, it's extremely unlikely that you have anything useful or interesting to say on the subject anyway. My personal rule is to focus on raising questions rather than answer them, and the same is true for this channel. I'm not interested in telling you what I believe, much less what you should. But for the purposes of this story, it's genuinely difficult to tell without sounding like I am. So I'll try to keep things as apolitical as I can and stick with facts and questions. There are no unwarranted opinions here. The pandemic has presented numerous unique challenges, the most central and controversial of which being, how do we find a balance between public good and personal liberty? What is beneficial and necessary? What role should lawmakers have in deciding that? And at what point do they cross over that threshold into the realm of unlawful or unconstitutional? As messy and complicated as those questions are, an even grander one lurks just behind them. How do we parse ideas and decisions that are sound and good from those which just sound good? Decisions that may even be good in the short term, but yield disastrous consequences in the long term. Early in the pandemic, the federal government issued a moratorium on evictions through the CARES Act, whereby landlords were no longer allowed to evict tenants because they are unable to pay rent. The idea being that with a pandemic on and so many people suddenly out of work, the last thing we need is for the streets to become flooded with the suddenly homeless. This immediately raised legal concerns because, well, what grants the federal government jurisdiction over a private business rescinding service to one of its customers? If the Fifth Amendment protects all citizens from having their property seized by the government for public use without due compensation, does the government dictating that you let someone live on your property while receiving nothing in exchange constitute a violation of that right? But let's put that aside for a moment. Let's say you're not at all interested in the legal or ethical questions at play, and let's just focus on the effects. People who may otherwise be homeless aren't. They have a place to live and are mostly safe when they otherwise wouldn't be. So the collective effect is a positive one, right? Well, what about landlords? They're being told that their business is not allowed to function as a business, so they and their families are being denied compensation for the service they are expected to provide. Does this still sound like a net good? Maybe you're in the screw landlords camp. You see them as leeches who charge exorbitant prices for an often substandard product and milk the income of the working class, so you feel absolutely zero pity for their plight. Let's say, hypothetically, that you're in that camp, and so the eviction moratorium is still a net good for society. Well, in that case, what about the long-term effect? The moratorium was in place for more than a year. That's a long time for a business to be less than or even unprofitable. The most obvious outcome for landlords is that at some point, they're going to have to make a choice regarding their business, the most obvious of which being, if owning a building is no longer profitable, they will have to not only sell it, but sell it at a point when its value has been drastically lowered by the market and conditions, which is precisely what was and is happening now. And who's going to buy it? Why, just your friendly neighborhood building management company. Now take that example I've described and extrapolate it all over the country. Small-time landlords and building management companies are selling, and larger companies are buying them up. Like so many decisions made during the pandemic, the end result is larger companies gobbling up larger shares of their respective markets, while smaller businesses are driven out. And this is what we're seeing now. So I ask you, is this still a good idea? Is society better off with small business being squeezed out in favor of corporations? And all with a gigantic assist from the federal government? You know, for the greater good. If you've ever worked at a dead-end job well into your 20s, then maybe this will sound familiar to you. Someone gets hired who is fresh out of high school. They just graduated and they're only going to be working there a couple months before heading off to college. Then someone a little bit older gets the idea and to try and turn things around for themselves and escape. They're going to go back to school and get their life back on track. Soon the idea spreads like wildfire and half the staff are registering for classes and talking about becoming a nurse or a dental assistant or some shit. Some of them will hunker down, do the work, and manage to break free from waiting tables or working in retail. But others will just drift in a circle for a couple months before giving up. I was one of the ones who got caught up in this and actually managed to get out. I went to community college. So I go to this tiny community college in Maryland with a few thousand students. I drive out there on the first day, and the parking lot is jam-packed. By the time I find a parking space, I am at least 2 football fields away from the nearest building. After a couple weeks, I make that same drive and arrive at the exact same time, only now the parking lot is mostly empty. So what happened? To explain this, we need to take an excursion to learn about the economy of government benefits. See, a few years prior, when my wife and I first moved in together, we'd been struggling to get by. We lived near her aunt and cousin who just didn't work. They lived entirely off benefits and knew all the tricks in order to get free shit from the government. And they weren't smart either. These are people, they were exceedingly stupid. I'm talking, it's the first of the month, so you go to the store and buy fresh crabs. Then you're broke on the 20th, but on the first of the month, you go buy fresh crabs again. I'm talking people who ash their cigarettes right into the carpet and can't figure out why they're sick all the time. That kind of stupid. But these are also people who survive by being fluent in the language of benefits. And as someone who had only known that you work in order to get money, it was strange. It was like discovering an extra room in your house that you hadn't noticed before. We never received or even applied for any of the many programs that exist, but seeing it in action, seeing the outline of its form take shape in front of your eyes is something that you can't unsee. So back to the mostly empty community college parking lot. What happened? Well, my first semester, professors kept referring to President Obama passing some kind of education initiative to get more people into college. Now everyone had the right to an education and were eligible to receive federal grants to attend community college. The way they referred to the president was bizarre, like there had been a continual drought, and then they prayed for rain and this magical deity showed up and just made money pour from the heavens just for them. The parking lot that was once full to burst and then mostly empty was because those were mostly the people that knew how to get free shit. They would apply for a grant, which they were guaranteed, register for classes, and show up until they received the remainder of their grant money. Confused? Well, let's say you receive $4,000 in federal grant money for a semester of community college. You register for the bare minimum of credits required for the grant, let's say $1,200. And you don't even buy the books for those classes. Well, what happens to the remaining $2,800? Well, they just mail you a check. After all, it's your money. Spoiler, it's not your money. It was someone else's money until it was taken away from them through taxes and given to you. So the half-empty parking lot represented all of the people who, like my wife's aunt, knew the ins and outs of gaming the system. They went to class until their check came in and dipped out. And if you think that sounds completely insane, remember what I said about how everyone has the right to an education? What do you think happens when they inevitably fail the classes they stopped showing up for? Why, they have the right to reapply and try again. I had a coworker confirm this to me as she had done it multiple times for multiple semesters over a couple years. I think the first time she did it was because she wanted to go to a Fall Out Boy concert. She said that at some point federal grant applications get denied if you don't show up, but she couldn't remember how many times it took. Now, I love this community college. It did wonders for my personal growth and afforded me numerous opportunities that I'm extremely grateful for. But the question I always ask myself is it all worth it? I think back on that half-empty parking lot. Thousands of students and thousands of dollars apiece. Extrapolate that to small schools like mine all over the country, the one you might pass by every day, and we're talking billions of dollars every year taken from taxpayers in the hope of guaranteeing someone like me the opportunities I was given. Is it worth it? I honestly don't know. To quote Dr. Thomas Sowell, much of the social history of the Western world over the past 3 decades has been a history of replacing what worked with what sounded good. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you when I see you.